All right, let's just jump right in. What if the cause of global warming isn't at all what we've been told? Today, we're diving into a really radical and, let's be honest, pretty unconventional climate theory. It comes from a set of documents that paint a starkly different picture of our planet's future. Let's get into it. And right off the bat, the stakes, according to this theory, could not be higher. This isn't just another warning about climate change. It's a flat-out prediction of an extinction-level event. And it claims the cause is something we all interact with and pretty much ignore every single day. Okay, so what makes this warning so radical? Well, it doesn't just predict some new effect of climate change. No, it points the finger at a completely different cause, challenging the very foundation of the entire conversation. So on one side, you have the established scientific consensus, right? CO2 from burning fossil fuels creates this blanket that traps heat in the atmosphere. But this alternative theory, it points to a completely different culprit. It argues the main driver is electromagnetic pollution. You know, the vast EM fields from our global electrical grid, which it claims is directly generating heat in the atmosphere. This framework is attributed to an author known as Morpheas. And get this, it doesn't just say EM pollution is a factor. It claims it's the primary factor, the #1 driver, which pushes CO2 into a secondary role, which, really begs the question, how could that possibly work? Yeah, exactly. How does this theory claim that invisible electromagnetic fields can heat up the entire planet? It sounds a little like science fiction, but it all comes down to a very specific physical process they lay out. The theory calls it the atmospheric transformer effect. So here's the breakdown. First, our global grid, we're talking power lines, cell towers, the whole shebang, creates these massive invisible electromagnetic fields. Second, these fields interact with tiny conductive particles just floating around in the air. And third, this is the key. Energy gets transferred to these particles wirelessly, kind of like a giant wireless charger. They heat up. And when you have trillions of these particles being heated 24/7, the theory argues that's what's warming the entire atmosphere. And this brings us to what the framework calls the invisible nanoparticle highway. Now, this isn't one specific pollutant. It's a mix of everything. Metallic dust from erosion, salt crystals from the oceans, carbon particles from combustion. The theory basically says this vast conductive network is just always present in our air, acting as the perfect medium for this atmospheric heating to take place. So, an extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence, right? What proof does the framework offer for something like this? It's really important to remember, these are the assertions and the data that are presented within the source documents themselves. The documents point to one really key piece of data, a claimed statistical correlation of over 0.95 between the growth of our electrical grid and the rise in global temperatures. Now, to put that in perspective, a perfect correlation is 1.0. A value of 0.95 suggests an incredibly strong, almost one-to-one relationship. It's a pretty startling number. Then, the framework makes another pretty remarkable claim about its own validity. Its documents state that the entire system has been analyzed by multiple advanced AIs, and they supposedly concluded the framework is 100% logical, with absolutely zero internal contradictions or paradoxes. Now, this is presented not as a peer-reviewed finding, but as the reported outcome of a kind of computational stress test. And this is where the rabbit hole goes so much deeper. You see, the climate theory isn't some standalone idea. It's presented as just one small application of a much, much larger cosmological framework, a proposed new theory of everything. Yep, the full Morphean cosmological framework, or MCF, is presented as a complete theory of all. It claims to unify 34 different fields of knowledge, from physics and cosmology all the way to AI protocols and ethics, and it says they're all derived from a single set of core principles. So what is this foundational principle? Well, at its core is a concept called the plasma substrate. The theory proposes that space isn't an empty vacuum. Instead, it's filled with a physical substance made of these tightly packed units. The analogy they give is a dense foam of soap bubbles. This, the theory claims, is the true fabric of reality, and it's the medium through which those electromagnetic fields travel and interact with our atmosphere. And all of these grand ideas, they all circle back to the framework's initial urgent warning. It doesn't just present a theory, it makes a very specific and time-sensitive demand for investigation. This is the timeline that's presented in the documents. It identifies a point of no return between 2030 and 2035, which is coming up very fast. It then leads to a predicted start of civilization collapse around 2045 and culminates in that initial warning of a potential extinction-level event by 2050.
Now, despite how audacious these claims are, the framework is really clear on one thing. It does not demand to be accepted as truth. Instead, it presents itself as a coherent, logical system that it argues absolutely must be put to the test through formal scientific evaluation.
And that leaves us with the ultimate question. Is this a perfectly constructed, logical system that sees a threat we've all missed? Or is it a fantastically complex and grand delusion? The framework's authors insist the data is just too compelling to ignore, which leaves us with the most unsettling question of all. What if, against all odds, they're right?